Hey guys, my name is Matumio, and welcome to another episode of Sunday Mailbox. This is a video series where you, the viewer, can submit your gaming or Battlefield-related questions, and then I will give my humble opinion on them. Now, to get the formalities out of the way real quick, if you would like to submit your own question that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below, or by sending me a YouTube message. The first question for the day comes from Jack, and it is, what do you think about giving DMRs the ability to use the high magnification scopes that the bolt-action rifles and the SR338 get to use? I think it would make more sense since some of the DMRs, such as the Ace-53 SV, are snipers in the real world, and this would give them a better ability to do what their job is for, which is hitting targets at long range. For the most part, I would agree with you. Like, something needs to be done to the DMRs, because right now, they're not necessarily useless. Like, every once in a while, I'll get killed by someone who was using the SKS or the Ace-53, but realistically, the assault rifles, the carbines, which are also an all-kit weapon class, they outperform DMRs in every situation. They get dominated up close, they get dominated at medium and long range, and there's really no reason to use the DMRs right now. And so I personally think there needs to be an overhaul at how DMRs are balanced. And honestly, what I would like to see done is make it so DMRs are a recon-only weapon. First of all, there just doesn't need to be this many bolt-action rifles in the game, and I think this might be the reason why DICE didn't give the DMRs to recons only, because they had plans on giving 11 bolt-action rifles. You look at the stats between the bolt-action rifles, they're practically identical. Like, there are some that are slightly different, some are better for close encounter combat, some have a little bit more accuracy, but when you really get down to it, if there were just about 5 bolt-action rifles and then 5 designated marksman rifles just for the recon class, that would be fine. Like, that would be what we had back in Battlefield 3, and I would say the recon class back in Battlefield 3 did just fine with the weapons that they had. And I know some people might complain, oh, we're losing weapons, oh my god, but really, you look at the amount of bolt-action rifles in the game, the variety there, sure, they look a little bit different, but you look at the stats, they're practically identical. And the reason why I think they should make the DMRs a return to a recon-only weapon is that it would make it so that they can have the higher optics. The reason why, and this is what DICE has stated, the reason why the DMRs don't have the 8x scope or the higher optics right now in Battlefield 4 is because they're an all-kit weapon. They don't want an assault rifle sniping people from across the map or in a support player having the same type of firepower as the recon. They want recon to be the best long-range kit in the game. Like, it's clear that that's the balance that they want. They like the whole rock, paper, scissors mentality when they're trying to balance all of their classes, and if they made it so that every single kit had access to these long-range weapons and higher optics, then they would run into the problem where the recon would feel less effective. And so if they just made it so that it was a recon exclusive weapon class, then we wouldn't have this problem and we could have the customization that the weapons require, you know, the higher optics. And honestly, if they just made it so that it was like it was back in Battlefield 3, I would be okay with that. Like, I felt like in the previous game, the DMRs were in this sweet spot. They weren't too overpowered, at least on PC. I know that on console, it may have been a larger problem. I know that a lot of console players can complain more about the DMRs in that game, but at least on PC, they felt like they were, you know, legitimate weapons. They weren't as good as the overpowered guns. Like, they were nowhere near as powerful as the M16A3 or the popular M416 or the other amazing weapons in the game. But if you were playing as the recon class and you didn't want to use the bolt-action rifles and you wanted to be a little bit more aggressive, or you just wanted to be a little bit more effective, using the SKS or the M417 was a good way to go about it. You still had some great killing potential. You weren't blatantly overpowered because you had to have some skill behind it. You couldn't just spam down range. And, well, you know, maybe make it so that we tweak the sound of the DMRs, because I, just like you guys, hate that sound that whizzes by. I think that sound is one of the most annoying things in the game. Like, for the most part, the class of weapons was just way more effective. I just love the DMRs back then. Like, I truly didn't think that they were overpowered. I thought that they hit the sweet spot. And so, honestly, I don't think it's going to happen for Battlefield 4. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But for the next Battlefield title, you know, like Battlefield 5, Bad Company 3, I'd like them to go back what they did with Battlefield 3, where you give them plenty of bolt-action rifles, you know, maybe like 5 to 6. You don't really need any more than that because it just becomes redundant at that point. And then give them the DMRs, because then you don't have to run into the problem what we have right now with Battlefield 4, where you can't give them the appropriate customization. The weapons in general just feel weak because you don't want every single class using the same DMR or the same weapon class in the game. That's another reason why DMRs probably suck like they do. Make it so that's recon exclusive. You can could buff up the power a little bit so that the recon in general is just a little bit more effective, and then I think DMRs would be in a good place. But that's just my 2 cents. The next question comes from Tiki, and it is, what do you think of the class balance and dynamic of Battlefield Hardline? I'm not 100% sold right now on the way that the classes work in Battlefield Hardline, because what it looks like Visceral Games did, actually this is exactly what they did, is they copied and pasted the classes from Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 3 and just slapped them on into Battlefield Hardline, gave them a new name, gave them a couple new gadgets, and said, okay, you know, have fun. And while I think the classes work very well in Battlefield 4, you know, you have these epic maps, you have vehicles you have to deal with, and it makes sense to have an engineer, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in Battlefield Hardline. Like, sure, you have some vehicles. You got the Bearcat that would, you know, having an engineer is key, get those repairs on, but also to take out the enemy Bearcat. But because you've essentially made every single primary weapon amazing at taking out vehicles, like if you're using the AKM, one magazine size can take out an enemy vehicle in that one mag. Like, it's incredible how much power you can have. And if you have that power for all the weapons in the game, essentially, the role of the engineer becomes diminished severely. And maybe they have a lot of plans in store on making the engineer feel more useful. Like, this is the beta. They probably have some things up their sleeve. But honestly, I think that they should just remove the engineer class. I think they should even remove stuff like the Bearcat and those heavily armored vehicles, because they just don't make sense with a cops versus criminal theme. Like, I don't care what cop division it is, no cop in the right mind is gonna fire an RPG in the middle of a city or even have access to a RPG. Like, it doesn't make sense thematically. And I realize that they're trying to appeal to the veterans of Battlefield. Like, you know, past Battlefield games have had massive vehicle-centered gameplay, and now that Battlefield Hardline only has a couple of vehicles, they want to be like, hey, no, we have vehicle gameplay, it's there, it's not as crazy as it is in the past Battlefield titles, but we still have engineers, we still have RPGs, you're gonna feel right at home. But if you want it to feel distinctive, and you don't want it just to be a copy and paste of Battlefield 4, and essentially feel like a DLC, which is one of the largest complaints of the Battlefield community right now, or the gaming community, like everyone looking at Battlefield Hardline is saying this looks like a DLC for Battlefield 4, that I think you need to hammer out that theme. Like, having RPGs, having these tank-like vehicles, while I know you're trying to appeal to the core demographic of Battlefield, you can't do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's going against the theme, and I personally think you just need to focus on cops versus criminals, get that gameplay down packed, and then go from there. The next question is, why did Titanfall fail? Well, I wouldn't say that Titanfall was a failure. Like, it sold a lot of copies. Like, I think they made a lot of money off of it, but I think it wasn't a failure in the sense that it didn't keep people's attention as long as people were expecting it to be. Like, a lot of people were thinking that this was going to be the next big multiplayer game. You were going to see it all over YouTube. There was going to be montages, you know, channels would sprout up. They would get millions of subscribers because they were completely focusing on Titanfall. That's not what we got. And while I think we could talk about this topic for hours. Like, it's really interesting. You could talk about the nuances on why Titanfall just didn't grab people or hold on to people as long as something like Call of Duty, Battlefield, or Counter-Strike. What I think it really comes down to is that the gameplay itself, there isn't a lot of variety there. Like, if you play one round, you pretty much know exactly how all rounds are going to play out from then on out for all different game modes. It didn't matter what game mode you're playing on, the gameplay is pretty much the same throughout. You start off with some pilot versus pilot gameplay, you get a couple of kills, you call in your Titan, you then have some Titan versus Titan combat, and by the end of the round, only a couple of minutes later, you have Titan versus pilot combat. That's it for all of the game modes. There isn't a lot of variation between it. You don't have, or at least I don't think you have, any modes that are just pilot versus pilot. There are just Titan versus Titan. That was a fun one. But honestly, all of the game modes revolve around that type of system. Nothing wrong with that. That's exactly what you get, but you get that almost every single round, and so it can become a little repetitive. There's also not a wide variety of different customization. There's only a couple of weapons, and for those weapons, you can change a couple of things, such as their scope. There's a little bit of variety for the barrels. I know that you could use like a suppressor, but that's about it. So you use one gun, you pretty much know exactly what you're going to be getting throughout your entire time in Titanfall. But in something like Battlefield or like Call of Duty, while I think that some of the customization get a little ridiculous, there is just an absurd amount of weapons to choose from, and that brings just more variety to the game. Like, one day you could be like, hey, I'm going to use the Type 88 LMG. I'm going to slap on the suppressor. I've never used that before. I'm going to try that out. The next day, you could try out a different assault rifle that you've you've never used before with a wide variety of different attachments. And it's that type of depth that keeps people playing the game. I know that some people say that that's not really good for a first-person shooter because it just feels like an attachment treadmill and you're just working for the next upgrade, you're working for the next attachment. And while I do agree with that to some extent, having a wide variety of weapons and customization does extend the game. There is more variety there. And so because Titanfall is just simplistic, not a bad thing, like that's fine. It makes it a lot easier to balance all the weapons. I would say that Titanfall is very well balanced. It also makes it so that the variety isn't there, extending the life of the game. And so to put it simply, the reason why I think Titanfall wasn't able to grab its audience or hold on to its audience as long as a lot of other first-person shooters out there is because the gameplay becomes repetitive. Like, you know what you're gonna get. It's very well balanced, and I think a lot of people, when they look back on Titanfall, they had a positive experience. Like, all of my friends, when they look back on Titanfall, they had a good time. But because it gets repetitive, because you know exactly what you're gonna get, and it's like the same thing over and over and over again, it gets stale after, you know, the 10th or 20th hour playing the multiplayer. The next question comes from Jack, and it is, how would you feel if DICE and the developers added 2 or 3 new character models for each class for each faction, thus adding an overall aesthetic addition? Either that, or they could do something back like in Battlefield 3, where they added different models in the Aftermath DLC, where they were to do something like that pertaining to the Dragon Teeth DLC. This is a cool idea. I know that many people have been wanting to have a visual update for the classes for some time now, just to make it so that if you're playing as the Assault class for the US, the other Assault guy right next to you doesn't look like a carbon copy. And while that's amazing for gameplay because it allows you to distinguish between all of the classes for each faction, so at a glance you know exactly what role they're playing as, you're right, having carbon copies can take away from the gameplay experience if you're playing in the multiplayer. And while immersion isn't the biggest thing for a multiplayer experience, it would be nice to have a little bit of variety there. The problem we get into, though, or more of a challenge for the art department, is having a unique look for all of the factions, having a consistent look for all of the factions, adding in all of these different looks for each of the classes, making it so that each class still looks unique compared to all of the other classes, but also making it so that, you know, they're unique to the other factions as well. That is not an easy thing to pull off. That would be very, very challenging. And so the most likely way that they're going to do this is what they did with the Aftermath DLC, making it so that each class looks different from the core game, but, you know, you still have carbon copies if you're playing as the support or you're playing as the engineer. They look rugged, they look completely different, you know, they look amazing. I love the Aftermath DLC. Like, everything about that DLC was fantastic. And so I could see that being one way they go about with Dragon's Teeth or with Final Stand, but I wouldn't really expect them to create 2 new uniforms or 2 new looks for all of the classes, for all of the factions, because the undertaking and making it all look unique, while I think it's possible, I think that they have the skill, you know, they have some amazing artists at DICE, I just don't think that they're going to put the resources and time into creating that many different varieties. But yeah, guys, that is about it for today's Sunday Mailbox. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, if you would like to submit your own questions that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below or by sending me a YouTube message. But until tomorrow, guys, have a good one and take it easy.